You're listening to the Oddscast, the original UFC betting podcast that's straight to the point. Hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Kalikas and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. They provide you the absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting. MMAOddsBreaker.com. Don't place your wagers without us.
Welcome to the Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 237 event, which takes place in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, Kyle Marley won 1.1 units for his free bet on UFC on ESPN plus 9 on Cole Smith. Marley also went 6-0 overall with his premium bets for the event for a total of plus 28 units. Marley's fantasy MMA picks and premium bets are available now on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present, UFC 237 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, ESPN, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on Fight Pass is a unique fight because a short notice replacement was just added and lines aren't available. So we'll just basically say it's women's 135-pound bout between Talita Bernardo, who's 6-3, and short notice replacement Viviane Araujo, who's 6-1. Araujo does have some talent, especially in the grappling department, but basically Nick and I both agree that Bernardo is a natural 135-pound fighter. Araujo is a strawweight moving up on super short notice. And Bernardo's just a little bit better striker, wrestler, bigger, stronger. So we're both going to be picking Bernardo, even though the odds are not available for that fight. But moving on, for the next televised bout on Fight Pass is a bantamweight contest between Raoni Barcelos, who is 13-1, taking on Carlos Huachin, who is 10-3-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
A couple quick shout outs before we get started here. First, Big Marley 3, as Brian mentioned. Make sure you guys go over to MMAOddsBreaker.com, click on the premium picks tab, and make sure you check out his wagers. The guy is up over $26,000 on $100 wagers. That's up over 260 units in the last year. The guy's been red hot. He's definitely worth checking out and buying his premium packages and DraftKings analysis as well. So check out our premium picks tab on MMAOddsBreaker.com for more details. And as always, special shout out to BetDSI, our sponsored sportsbook for this podcast as well. So make sure you show both of those places and those spots some love. Now on to the fight. Barcelos opened minus 320. Huachin opened at plus 240. And what you're seeing right now over at BetDSI is a ridiculous movement. Right now, currently at DSI, we're seeing minus 1015 on Barcelos. The comeback on Huachin is plus 615. So needless to say, a lot of action coming in Barcelos' way. It's ridiculous with the amount of movement from the opener to what it is now, of course, but that's not necessarily really wrong, though, as far as movement goes, because Barcelos should be a very heavy favorite in this fight. I mean, skill-wise, there's no question what he is capable of. I mean, the guy is only getting better now. He's had a couple fights in the UFC. He's kind of getting his confidence. He's kind of getting settled into the UFC, and the guy's a total package. I mean, he has devastating striking ability. I mean, knockout power, really clean technique to go along with it. He's got decent cardio. He's got good wrestling, a good ground game. So he's a complete package. And honestly, in the bantamweight division, he's setting himself pretty well for a nice run towards a bantamweight title shot eventually. So you're talking about a future title contender in Barcelos. That's how good this guy's skill is. Now, in Huachin, I mean, you do have a very young, talented fighter coming from Peru. He's actually from a solid camp over there in the Pitbull camp. I know that they've actually produced very decent competitors. I mean, Barzola actually came from there that competes in the UFC and won the Ultimate Fighter. So, I mean, for training in that region, it's actually pretty solid. And this kid is a threat, definitely. On the feet, he's got some decent boxing. He's very accurate, has some knockout power to go along with it, has a little bit of wrestling, and a lot of comparables to Barcelos. He's just not quite there yet. Underground, he's not as good. And he does lack a little bit in cardio. If you watch some of his fights, if he doesn't get the finish early on at times, he does tend to fade as the fight goes on. And he is taking this on short notice as well. So there's a lot of strikes going against him. That's why you're seeing the line escalate as high as it did with Barcelos. I mean, like I said, Huachin isn't really as bad as this current line indicates, but stylistically the matchup kind of is for him. And that's why you're seeing the action coming that way. So I agree with Barcelos. I think he does get it done. I mean, it's going to have to be just a clean shot landing and kind of a surprising, I don't want to say lucky punch from Huachin to win this fight, but I mean, he's got a puncher chance and that's about it in this matchup. On the cards, Barcelos wins. He probably wins before he hits the cards as well. So I just think this young man's in a little bit too much in his debut here. I know he's, like I said, a warrior competitor coming in, taking it on short notice. He wants to get in the UFC and prove that he belongs. Unfortunately for him, I think he's going to suffer a loss in his debut. So Barcelos is the winner, probably inside the distance here.
And I completely agree. Huachin is talented. He's got power. He can finish fights quickly, but literally every time he's ever gone the distance, he has been unable to win the fight, whether it went to a draw or he lost. So, Barcelos, if he's smart here, he paces himself and then just allows Huachin to, tire himself out. Or, I mean, Barcelos probably is talented enough that if he wants to, he can be aggressive early as well. Barcelos is, in my opinion, by far the best boxer, the best wrestler, and the best grappler that Huachin's ever faced in his career thus far. Barcelos has already shown that he's a very capable striker and grappler in the UFC. He's beat his first two opponents, which were both better than Huachin and way more experienced. So this is a really, really tough fight for Huachin. I mean, I think, Barcelos had tougher fights in LFA to get to the UFC, than this one. So like Nick said, I think this will be a puncher's chance for Huachin to get the victory. And I think it's very unlikely that punch does land because, Huachin has power, but that really seems like that's the only chance that he has in this fight whatsoever. So I'm going to side with Barcelos. I think that he wins convincingly, and I expect that he does get a finish along the way, possibly submission, I think is the most likely evident. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Warlley Alves, who is 12-3, taking on Sergio Moraes, who is 14-4-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds makers' perspective on this one?
Alves minus 165, Moraes plus 125. That was the opener at BetDSI. And what we're currently seeing right now is Alves actually at minus 140, the comeback around plus 110 or so at DSI on Moraes. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, and there is two-way action coming into this fight. A little bit more action coming in Moraes' way. This should be an interesting fight. I mean, Alves, in my opinion, has been overall in his career a bit of a letdown. I mean, the guy has definitely had some talent. There was a lot of hype coming, from him with the Ultimate Fighter performances. A lot of people are expecting some great things from him. And again, he's had some setbacks and he's had some scratch your head type of losses. Now, I mean, to decent competition, I guess you could say. I guess the Barberena loss was probably the biggest head scratcher. But again, Barberena is just a tough out. But the Usman loss, obviously Usman is a champion right now. And then getting beat by Krause, though, in his last fight. I mean, James Krause is a very solid fighter, but you'd expect better from Alves in that regard too, a little bit higher level. So Alves does have a lot of power. He does have a lot of talent. He's got some speed. He's got some athleticism. He's got some good wrestling. Unfortunately for him, he's just inconsistent with his cardio. And honestly, once you get him to the ground, if he doesn't get that guillotine choke and locked in on you, which is very dangerous. I mean, once he gets that sucker locked in, it's pretty much a wrap, right? He does definitely have that going for him on the ground. But outside of that, I mean, when the guy starts to wear down a little bit, you can definitely exploit some weaknesses, especially on the ground. And that's not where you want to be in a guy, facing a guy like Moraes. Moraes obviously is a ground wizard. I mean, the guy's phenomenal on the ground. But his wrestling is decent. It's okay, especially for a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He is capable of getting the fight to the floor, but it's not outstanding enough that I think he's going to be able to, at least early on, get Alves to the floor. So this is going to play out in the feet. Now, Moraes, being a jiu-jitsu practitioner, he has improved quite a bit on the feet. So he's no slouch there. You got to take him serious, especially again with Alves fading. Even if he's stuffing takedowns, I mean, Moraes could pick up the activity as the fight goes a little bit and even possibly outpoint him on the feet. So this is interesting for sure. And that's why you're seeing a competitive line here. I'm going to side with Alves here, though, slightly, because, again, I think he could sprawl brawl, keep this fight upright, land a little bit harder on the feet, and kind of bully Moraes if he shows up and does have a little bit of cardio going for him, and he can make it 3 rounds solid. I think he should probably win this fight. So it should be competitive, though, even if it does hit the scorecards. And if there's going to be a finish, it's either going to be Alves by knockout or it's going to be Moraes by sub on the ground. So I think that's how it probably ends if it does end. Outside of that, if it hits the scorecards, a competitive decision with, I think, Alves getting the job done. So I'm going to slightly lean his way. Always tough, though, to bet on Alves. I mean, just the inconsistency alone makes it very difficult to bet.
Yeah, Alves is difficult to bet on because not just that he has conditioning issues, but even though he has power, he's not exactly a technical striker. I mean, Usman beat him, and you would think that Usman would beat him by just taking him down a ton, but Usman was standing and trading with him, and that really wasn't his strength at the time, and he just was aggressive and went after him, and Alves wasn't able to keep up. So that is something to consider, that even though Alves, is a dangerous striker in terms of if he can connect solidly, but he is not exactly a technical striker. So I could actually see if Moraes is aggressive enough, that Moraes has the power and, potentially, the aggression and the conditioning to push a decent enough pace on the feet that could bother Alves. Now, on the ground, obviously, Moraes is a wizard there, but as Nick mentioned, he doesn't have the greatest wrestling, and I think his wrestling is actually worse than Nick gave it credit for, mainly because Moraes he's had a lot of knee injuries throughout his career. His knees are shot. I mean, he really cannot shoot a power double or anything. I mean, he needs to get like a trip or, a really perfectly timed takedown when his opponent is fully exposed, and off balance. So I think a takedown from Moraes is very unlikely in this fight. So if it goes to the ground, it's mainly going to be because Alves was way off balance or Alves is exhausted. So, Moraes' best, course of action should be to push a high tempo, force Alves, to keep up with him or lose rounds. And then if Alves does keep up with him, maybe he slows down. So, that being said, I do still feel that Alves can take a shot better. I think Alves, is probably the better striker here as well. And he can mix it up better, especially if it gets to the clinch or something. So I'm going to side with Alves, but I'm not confident about it whatsoever, just because, as Nick mentioned, you really can't trust Alves. So until he becomes a more consistent fighter, I'm going to be always recommending no bets on Warlley Alves, even when I pick him. But Warlley Alves will be my pick. Now, moving on to the main event of the Fight Pass prelims, we have a lightweight contest between Clay Guida, who is 34-18, and BJ Penn, who is 16-13-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Guida opened minus 460, the comeback on Penn at plus 320. And what you're seeing right now over at BetDSI is Guida minus 705, the comeback on Penn plus 455. Crazy, crazy, crazy. I'm going to tell you what, BJ Penn is one of my all-time favorite fighters. I mean, the guy, he was, in my opinion, ahead of the game, ahead of the curve for a long time. And if those newbie fans out there that don't understand how good and how high level skill BJ Penn was, I mean, the guy had tremendous boxing, knockout power in the feet, of course. Just awesome striking, really good takedown defense, offensive wrestling that was underrated, in a submission game that would be just off the charts. So this guy was a complete fighter. Fighting in any weight class he could possibly fight at. He was just a true fighter. Everything about him was just class. Now to see him have almost a 500 record is just sad. I know the guy loves it. Fighting's in his blood, and he just can't stop, and he believes that he is going to be champion again, and with the crazy interviews I've heard. And that's good. I don't blame the guy for thinking like that. You have to be confident. But, let's face it here. The guy's definitely past his prime. And again, I just hate seeing him, lose some of these fights, because he is, whether he cares or not, he's destroying his legacy for sure. Especially, again, to the new blood and the newer fans that are coming in. They're not going to appreciate how great this guy was. So with all that said, it's a shame, because he's pretty much, after he gets past the first round these days, he's not going to have a lot of cardio. That's always hindered him in the past. Penn has always had some conditioning issues. He had all that talent, but if he got in deep waters and got in trouble at times, that would hinder him. So it's always been spotty with him with the cardio, but now at this spot in his career, it's definitely worse. And that's the thing. Guida, even if he's having trouble against Penn here, I mean, Penn is the better mixed martial artist. There's no question. Guida obviously has that wrestling background. He's improving his striking, and he's going to be a threat on the feet, especially to an aging BJ Penn. So it'll be competitive even in that aspect of things. But Penn is a better mixed martial artist. But after round one, Guida does have the cardio. Guida does have that drive to continue and to finish strong. And I think Guida, even if it is a Penn round early on, Guida takes over and wins this fight. So everybody sees the writing on the wall. I mean, it's sad to see BJ Penn in this state, and I think he's going to suffer another loss, which in his prime he would not have lost to Clay Guida. I mean, Guida in his prime was definitely a handful. Much respect for him as well, man. I mean, I always love watching him fight. But both these guys are past their prime. It's just that Guida has a little bit more left in the tank, and I think he can implement his game plan, and his relentless pace is going to be too much for Penn as it goes. Even if he has some flashes in this fight, I still don't see Penn winning, and that's why all the action's coming in on Guida as well. It's basically, Guida only has to do is survive early, and he probably gets it done. So I think that is a case here, and unfortunately for Penn, he's going to probably get another loss. So the pick is Guida.
And I'm right with you. I mean, BJ Penn at this point, I mean, he has not won a fight since UFC 123, and this is UFC 237, almost double that. So, I mean, it's just screaming delusional when he's saying he could still be champion. I mean, you look at a guy like Chad Mendes, who was a top 5 fighter who lost to a guy that's fighting on the main card of this event, and Mendes retired because he didn't think that he could become champion. Like, even though he was still an elite, at least top 10 guy at 145. And BJ Penn, I mean, hasn't won a fight, in almost a generation, it feels like. It's crazy. And he's still saying that he can become champion. I mean, I really wish the UFC would just stop giving him opportunities, but I guess they just don't want to see him fighting elsewhere. But I mean, he's done so much damage to his name and, his legacy. It feels like, it's just been embarrassing at this point. And, Clay Guida is a guy that, as Nick mentioned, BJ Penn would have carved like a Thanksgiving turkey, back in the days when he, smashed Diego Sanchez. So, to think that Clay Guida is a huge betting favorite against BJ Penn, I mean, it just boggles my mind a little bit. Guida does have a little bit of power in his hands. He's, got the wrestling, obviously. He's got the conditioning, and that's really where his biggest edge is. BJ Penn is going to slow down. He cannot push a high tempo. Maybe BJ will be strong for the first few minutes, but if Clay Guida just stays in his face, whether it's with takedowns, whether it's with striking, whether it's just constant action and movement and forcing BJ to follow him around, I think BJ's just going to tire out, and Clay Guida is going to wear him down and probably win a decision, but potentially get a finish along the way. If BJ wins, he's going to have to knock him out early, or catch him in a guillotine or something, with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if, Guida leaves his neck hanging out on a takedown attempt, which he's done in the past. So my pick's going to be Clay Guida, unfortunately. Now moving on to the ESPN preliminary card, we have a women's flyweight contest between Luana Carolina, who is 5-1, and Priscilla Cachoeira, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Carolina opened -155, the comeback on Cachoeira +115. And what you're seeing right now over at BetDSI is currently Carolina sitting at -170, the comeback +140 on the other side on Cachoeira. So a little bit more action coming in Carolina's way. There has been 2A action coming in this fight, though. It's been back and forth a little bit. Carolina looks pretty good. I mean, she's a prospect. She was on the Contender Series Brazil. And if you look at her fights, I mean, she's got a striking-based background, and she's got Muay Thai skill, and she's got some length for the division at 125 pounds as well. And man, I'll tell you what, watching her strike when she's aggressive and she's active, it's pretty fun because she could definitely throw some nice combinations together. She can have some power behind it as well, so she could be effective and, she's definitely a threat on the feet, put it that way. And as far as ground game goes, I mean, if she gets put on her back, which that's an area that she has to work on, is her takedown defense. And she continues to develop her ground game, but she does have a bit of a guillotine choke, and she threatens off her back a little bit as well. So she's more than just a striker. She's definitely improving. I was impressed. The more footage I dug up on her and the more I watched her fight, you could tell the little improvements that she's slowly making fight by fight in her game. And I mean, I think we're going to see a better version of her coming in to this fight as well. So, I mean, you got to definitely watch out for her. Like I said, the only thing that I don't like about her is at times she's a little too tentative, and she's very hittable at times on the feet as well. Her defense can get a little bit better. When her opponent gets aggressive at times, she backs up and she kind of, shies away from some damage, which obviously a lot of fighters do, but it doesn't look good on the judges' scorecards, I think, in my opinion. So if an aggressive fighter's coming at her, I mean, she could have some problems here against Kashera, because Kashera is that type of girl that likes to be aggressive. She's had a tough time so far in the UFC. I mean, facing the champ at 125 pounds, Shevchenko, in her debut and just getting destroyed and then bouncing back. Had a competitive fight in her last outing against McCann, but still, unfortunately for her, came out on the losing end of that one as well. And this is another tough fight. So this is going to be a competitive fight. I think Kashera is a lot better than people are giving her credit for. And I think what she wants to do here is exploit the ground game, try to put Carolina on her back and avoid the submissions and see what she can do there. I don't know if she's going to have a lot of success. Again, I mean, based on what I'm seeing, I think Carolina is improving, better, fight by fight. And I think she's going to be able to stuff most of the takedown attempts here on the feet and leave it on the feet, I should say, and then probably mark Kashera up and do some damage along the way. So I do lean Carolina, but she is still raw. And again, at the current price at 170, I'm expecting Kashera to show up. So it's a tough one to bet even at this price though. So I would be cautious because again, these ladies are getting better. They're finally facing higher level competition in their careers, and they have a lot of room to improve and development still. So I do like Carolina. I think she gets it done, but just be a little cautious on this fight.
Yeah, neither of these women are particularly top notch, at least in my opinion, in the women's flyweight division, but I do like Carolina striking a lot better than Cachoeira's. Cachoeira can push the tempo, but Carolina is a pretty decent Muay Thai specialist. She throws pretty good kicks at range. I think if they do get to a clinch, which is likely, she has some very nice knees. So I expect that she's going to perform pretty well. Her main issue, I think, is she doesn't maintain range particularly effectively. So Cachoeira could close the distance potentially if she's looking to get the fight to the floor or into the clinch or something. So even though Carolina's kicks are very strong, she might not be able to stay at a range where they'll be particularly effective for lengthy periods of time. So, Cachoeira, she had an horrific UFC debut getting thrown to the wolves literally against Valentina Shevchenko. But I think that she's a little bit better than what we've seen. But that being said, I still think that Carolina is the better striker here. And unless Cachoeira can make this ugly, maybe force it into more of a brawl, force Carolina to fight off her back foot and maybe score a takedown or two along the way, I think it'll be Carolina's fight to win or to lose. So Carolina's going to be my pick. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Thiago Moises, who is 11-3, taking on Kurt Hollabaugh, who is 17-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Moises opened minus 170 to come back on Hollabaugh plus 130. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is minus 125 for Moises to come back plus 105 on the other side on Hollabaugh. This is a tough one too. I mean, both fighters, I think, have really improved again and have had not the greatest success, especially on this recent UFC run for Hollabaugh. I mean, it's a shame because I think Hollabaugh's the type of fighter that really shouldn't probably been cut from the roster originally when he did. So that was a bit strange because I think he had the talent to still compete in there. But, UFC let him go. He got outside of the UFC and started putting together a pretty decent and impressive win streak. And a lot of those fights coming from the Titan organization as well. And they gave him some tough competition. And he performed relatively well to the point where you could see some improvements in his game as well. So when he got that invitation back to the UFC, was happy to see it. On the Contender Series, he went out there and destroyed Bissett, which Bissett is not a bad fighter. So he made him look not on his level at all. So Hollabaugh does definitely present a lot of problems for guys in the featherweight or lightweight division. He's been bouncing back and forth throughout the last few years as well in both weight classes. So now he's going back up too lightweight, and he's facing a very game fighter in Moises. So in this spot here, it's interesting because normally I would favor Hollowball because I think Moises is a pretty solid fighter, and he's an improving fighter. He's young. He's only 24 years old, but he does have more holes in his game at this point. He doesn't have quite the experience Hollowball does. Hollowball's been in there with some of the best of the best. And honestly, out of the competition that he's faced recently, I mean, this is kind of a step down in competition for Hollowball as well. So not that Moises is an easy out by any means, but still. So I think Hollowball is going to come in here a little bit more confident. He desperately needs a win to keep his job and slot on the roster, even moving up to 155 pounds. And he's going to, obviously bring it all here. But Moises, I've been pretty impressed with him. I know in his last fight, that was kind of a tough fight, making your official UFC debut against Dariush, because just stylistically, Dariush is, if he hangs in there and he's not chinny and his chin does, survive a fight, Dariush obviously is a very talented and tough out. So I think Moises performed respectable in that fight, obviously. And again, this is going to be a big step down in competition as far as Hollowball goes, though, as far as if you're comparing those two, because Hollowball doesn't have quite the wrestling, that a guy like Dariush had as well. So that's what going to be the interesting part of this fight for me. Both of these guys like to stand and bang, and both these guys are very good at what they do, and they're both capable of knocking one another out here. In fact, I think Moises has gotten a lot better and more comfortable striking on the feet. He's got some nasty kicks he throws as well, and he can be effective, especially when he's aggressive, pushing forward. He could be very effective. So I think it's going to come down to who gets top control. Both these guys have decent wrestling offensively, but they have been put on their backs as well in the past, and that's kind of, got him beat. So I think it's going to be who comes down, who gets top position in this fight, who mixes things up a little bit better. I mean, because both these guys are truly complete mixed martial artists, and they're good in all aspects of the game. So I don't expect to finish here in this spot, unless these guys start throwing leather and it just becomes an all-out war in the middle of the cage, then it's possible. But outside of that, I expect a very, very competitive fight when it hits the scorecards. Again, just a complete mixed martial arts battle that's going to be competitive, close, another 29-28 type of split decision type of fight here. So I understand with the early action coming in a Hollowball and why the lines kind of drop like that. It's a dog or pass situation for sure, in my opinion here. But now it is getting tempted as Moises, slowly starts dropping down, because I think there's more upside to Moises, than there is Hollowball here. But again, must win fight for Hollowball. This is a pretty, almost a must win fight for Moises as well, because you don't want to suffer 2 straight losses in your UFC, debut, and then your second fight losing as well. So important fight for both gentlemen. It should be a close one. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the youngster here in Moises, and going to say he gets a close competitive decision win. But again, you could tell, it's a pick'em type of fight. I've been going back and forth on it myself. So I'll lean Moises here, but it's definitely one of those situations where if a line climbs up and Hollowball becomes a bigger dog, then there's going to be some value on him as well. So it's line watching time, but my pure pick is Moises to win this fight.
Moises is definitely capable of winning this fight. He's a talented striker when he's the aggressor. He's very talented on the ground as well. He's pulled off some amazing submissions in his career. So if this fight goes to the floor, I definitely favor him. He doesn't exactly have the best takedown offense though, so that is a concern. And my other issue is when Moises is being pressured, he does not respond well. When he's the aggressor, he's great. He's pushing a tempo. He's connecting. But when he's on his back foot, he really stops throwing. He lets his opponent dictate way too much. And that might happen here. Kurt Hollowball is going to be the bigger fighter here. And Moises had some trouble with a big, strong guy in his last fight in Dariush, who was the aggressor in that fight and forced him to fight off of his back foot. And when he's fighting like that, he really is capable of losing rounds easily. So if I'm Kurt Hollowball, I get right in Moises' face. I am trying to force him to fight my fight, which would be more of a brawling, striking based contest. And if Hollowball can force Moises to do that and keep him on his back foot, I think it's a very, very winnable fight for Hollowball. But that being said, if Moises can connect solidly, if he's the aggressor, if he secures the occasional takedown, then he'll be in good shape. But I just don't know if I can trust him. Now, I know obviously that Beneil Dariush is a guy that's been a top 15 lightweight in the past and is a fighter that a lot of people respect and is a fighter that is more talented and well-rounded than Hollowball. So he was able to execute a game plan very well against Moises. So Hannibal might not be as capable of executing that. So, I think this fight will be close. I think it'll be not nearly as difficult for Moises in this second UFC appearance, but Hannibal is definitely a guy that is due. He has good power in his hands. He has good size for the lightweight division. And if he can force Moises to fight off his back foot, I think that he actually is going to win this fight. So I'm actually going to pick Kurt Hannibal to win at least a decision here. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division for the final preliminary card bout, we have Lil Nog Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, who is 23-8, taking on Ryan Spann, who is 15-5. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Spann opened minus 185. The comeback on Nogueira plus 145. And right now what you're seeing at DSI is minus 145 plus 115. So line margins have tightened up and the line dropped a little bit more. Action coming in Nogueira's way. You know what? That action coming in Nogueira's way, I don't blame people at all. I know it's tough though when you get the Nogueira brothers. I mean, obviously they're way past their primes. And again, for those newbies out there that are listening to our show for the first time and don't really know much about Nogueira, I mean, Little Nog, as we call him. I mean, I'll tell you what, this guy is a talented fighter, one of the all-time greats at light heavyweight for sure. I mean, boxing, solid. Again, jiu-jitsu, one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the sport, him and his brother, of course, and just a class act. And he still has it. I mean, here's the thing. He's getting older. He's 42 years old. His movement is not the same. I mean, he's very slow and hittable on the feet, but he still has that technique. He still has that I don't want to call it muscle memory, but all that stuff. I mean, he's been doing it for so long that he definitely still has the accuracy. He still has the knockout power. If you get him to the ground, I mean, if you put him on his back these days, you could probably avoid getting submitted because his movement, again, is a little bit slower. So if you do put him on his back and you can control him, that is a path to victory for sure. If you got to be cautious though, because again, off his back, even though he is slowed down a bit, you can't, exactly just count him out completely. But that said, I mean, he's dangerous. If he gets top position on the ground, he's going to probably submit you. He gets your back, he's going to submit you. He's got obviously knockout power left again. He's proven that time and time again recently as well. He's just been fighting inconsistently. He's not fighting as often as you would like to see him fight. Well, actually at this point, I mean, I kind of don't blame him, 42 years old. So he's going to be in his home country. He gets motivated by that. There's a lot going for him in this fight. And that's why it's a tough spot. Spann is obviously the younger fighter. Man, this guy, his frame alone for the 205 pound for the light heavyweight weight class is something, man, because I'll tell you what, he's got the build, he's got the athleticism, he's got some gifts, definitely. And he's got some power on the feet. His grappling game is getting better. His wrestling is getting better. But I don't know, again, even though Nogueira slowed up a bit, I don't know if he wants to really grapple too much with Nogueira unless he does get on top. And like I said, if he can avoid, the submissions off the back, off of, the ground from Nogueira, then he should be okay in top position and do some damage there. On the feet, Spann does have a little bit of power. He's going to definitely be faster and he could definitely be effective here as well. But I still don't trust him. Spann's been chinny, and it's not just, people could recall back to his fight with Roberson and getting elbowed or whatnot. You know what? Even before that fight, I mean, if you look back, he's definitely been clipped in other fights, and his chin he just really can't be trusted all that much. So with Nogueira having that knockout power, that is definitely a concern for me. I mean, he's still a finisher, and Spann is definitely defensively vulnerable. He's got a bit of a chin problem as well. So I don't trust Spann in this spot, and laying chalk on it. I don't know, even if as the line's dropping a little bit, I know this is kind of a setup fight, in my opinion, for the UFC, kind of pushing younger talent forward and getting big name wins over. It seems like this is kind of a trend on this card as well, getting, setting up some of these younger guys for potentially big wins over some of these veterans. But it's not going to be an easy task. So again, this is another fight I've been kind of going back and forth on because, it's hard to trust Nogueira at his age. And I guess I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the athleticism of Spann to get it done. But again, I can't trust it. I wouldn't lay it. If Nogueira comes out here and finishes Spann, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So I'll pick Spann in this fight, but another spot where you got to be careful here because I wouldn't necessarily lay the chalk, even if it's small chalk at this point.
Nogueira, he definitely still has a few tricks up his sleeve. I mean, even at 42, 43 years old, that last fight against Sam Alvey, he was getting rocked a little bit at the end of the first round, and then Alvey got a little over aggressive, got clipped, and Nogueira definitely still has that killer instinct because he swarmed Alvey. He stayed right on top of him. Alvey kept trying to reset and back away and create some space, and then Alvey would throw big flurries against the fence if Nogueira got too close, and Nogueira just waded right into the fire and then cracked him with a big left overhand that put him away. So clearly Nogueira still is capable of getting finishes at his age, and Ryan Spann is a guy that he could definitely beat. I mean, Ryan Spann is a fighter that I think has conditioning issues. Spann is a bit chinny, but that being said, Spann also is a pretty dangerous striker in his own right. He has a great jab. He really does. And he's big. He's has very good size for the light heavyweight division. So if they're standing at distance, Spann is going to be cracking Nogueira with that jab. Spann has a 6.5 reach advantage in this fight. He's 3 inches taller. And if this fight goes to the floor, Spann is a decent grappler, and he does have a very good guillotine choke, but I don't expect in a million years that he's going to actually choke out Nogueira. Nogueira is just too savvy on the canvas. So I think Spann should be avoiding the ground and then basically just trying to keep his distance and connect with straight punches and jabs. If he can outpoint Nogueira, then he's going to be in really good shape. Spann has the size, he has the jab to make that game plan work. But if Nogueira does get inside, it's anybody's game because, at this point in his career, Nogueira does not have a good chin at all. Spann definitely also is a bit chinny. I mean, you saw that in his fight against Roberson on the Contender Series. Granted, it was about 6 fights ago, but I mean, he got clipped coming in, shooting for a takedown with some elbows and out cold in 15 seconds. So if Nogueira can crack him with a good left hand, and that Spann doesn't see coming, especially with Nogueira being a southpaw, that can make it a little awkward and difficult for Spann. I could totally see it happening. But that being said, I'm going to actually side with Ryan Spann. I think that size and the jab and the athleticism and everything that he has going for him will help him. I mean, this is a huge step up, even if Nogueira is near the end of his career. But I do think that potentially Ryan Spann can make it happen, especially if he sticks to a smart game plan and doesn't get too crazy and utilizes that big size and reach that he has. So my pick is going to be Ryan Spann. Now, moving on to the pay-per-view main card, we have Irene Aldana, who is 9-4, taking on Betch Correia, who is 10-3-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Aldana minus 265, Correia plus 185. And right now, what you're seeing over at BetDSI is Aldana minus 335, the comeback plus 255 on Correia. So line margins have tightened up, and there is more actually coming in on Aldana. Not really surprised. I mean, Correia, throughout her whole career, hasn't really had that fan favorite type of respect amongst most hardcore fans, I guess. So it's a shame because I'll tell you what, she does bring it, and she's definitely a tough out for most chicks in the division. I mean, a lot of people rate her off against talented fighters, and she's hung in there. Even in her losses, she's done extremely well. I mean, look at even the Holly Holm fight. She was performing above and beyond expectations before she got caught in that fight. She has a solid win, what I thought was a competitive fight that she stole away from Jessica Ai. That, could have definitely won Jessica Ai's way as well. But I'm just saying, against talented individuals and talented, fighters that she's performed against, I mean, she's hung in there and she's made it a lot closer than people think. So that's the type of fighter she is. She's gritty. She's tough. She's going to come forward. She's going to be in your face, and she's going to push a high pace, and it's hard to get her out of there. But she has been clipped. She has been hurt. And I think Aldana, man, I'll tell you what, before she entered the UFC, I wasn't very high on her. I thought she was overrated. I knew that she was popular. A lot of people were promoting her as a future champion and, a up and coming fighter that was a real threat, and they wanted to see her in the UFC, but she just didn't have all the skill quite yet as far as I saw. I mean, obviously she was a striking based fighter, and she still is, but she needed to get better in a lot of areas. And now I think since she's entered the UFC, it kind of been thrown in there against very talented competition. Even, not having all 100% success, she's gotten better. Even in her loss as well, she's gotten better. And I think that she's at the point now where she's got confidence. She's getting a little bit more calm and effective in the octagon because she is, I think, mentally in there better now as well. And she's improving on some of those holes in her game as far as takedown defense and her ground game as a whole as well. And then on the feet, she's just, throwing some bombs. So for a lady, I think she does have that knockout power. Again, we talk most of the times you don't see a lot of knockouts or a lot of damage on the feet in women's fights, but this is a case where Aldana could definitely deliver, and Correia is hittable. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a case where Aldana does end up accumulating enough damage on Correia and ends up finishing this fight before it does hit the scorecards. If it hits the scorecards, though, I still see Aldana winning. She should be able to outpoint Correia, and again, just land a little bit more effectively along the way. But if it does hit the cards, I expect it to be a 29-28 competitive type of decision, though, as well. So the pick is Aldana. Where the current line is right now, it's just a little bit too high to bet, because if it hits the scorecards, I'm expecting close fight, and you know how judges are. You just can't ever depend on those guys getting the scores right. So it's a pass situation as far as the line is right now, but I do got to pick Aldana. I would be surprised if she doesn't beat up Correia in this spot.
Yeah, I'm not expecting much from Correia here. When she's even at her best, she hasn't looked that good. I mean, the victory over Jessica Ai, that was a bit of a snoozer where they were just kind of staring at each other, occasionally throwing strikes. And she's held her own at times, but, for the most part, when she gets in there against a good striker with pop, Correia gets knocked out. That happened, even fighters that aren't particularly good strikers, if they have some pop, Correia is probably getting knocked out. That happened with Ronda. That happened with Holly Holm. And I think it's going to happen here. I mean, Irene Aldana didn't get off to the best start to her UFC career, but she's definitely looking better each time we've seen her. And, going back to her time in Invicta, she definitely has, some pop in her hands. I mean, she can crack. And, if she connects solidly with Correia, I think Correia is going to be in big, big trouble. Aldana, on the flip side, isn't the best defensively. So if Correia can push the pace and get inside, then she could land. Absolutely, because Aldana does clearly have some defensive flaws in her striking. I don't really expect this fight to go to the floor. I don't think either fighter is particularly good there. Although maybe Aldana could have an edge. We really haven't seen much out of Correia on the ground. But Aldana's been there a few times, mostly because people are trying to get away from her striking. But I do think Aldana is going to be the taller, longer fighter with a better jab, with more power behind her strikes. And you got to remember also that Correia hasn't fought in about 2 years. So I think that she could come in here a little bit rusty. It's not like Correia will have a big edge being Brazilian, facing another Brazilian. So, there's really not a lot to bank on here, other than the fact that, Correia could potentially take advantage of some defensive flaws. But other than that, I think Aldana, is going to be the better striker, the more powerful striker, and I think that she'll be the more consistent striker. So I'm going to side with Aldana. I think that she gets the job done. I think she actually does score a knockout along the way. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Thiago Alves, who is 28-13, taking on Loreno Staropoli, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmakers' perspective on this one?
Alves minus 185, Staropoli plus 145. That was the opener. Right now, what you're seeing over at BetDSI is Alves minus 120, the comeback around minus 110 for Staropoli. So more action coming in on the dog, Staropoli, in this spot. And I'm not really that surprised. I mean, I'll tell you what, his UFC debut against Aldana was pretty impressive, a lot better than I thought it would be. I mean, if you look at some of the footage pre-UFC, to me, he didn't look as good, as sharp, as aggressive. I mean, everything about his striking looked a lot better in the Aldana fight. And he proved a lot to me, because Aldana, I think, is an up-and-coming fighter in his own right. So that was a good test for both gentlemen. And him performing as well as he did and being tested against, I think, a solid competitor like he did, I mean, impressive. Again, way better than I thought on film. And that's why this is going to be a tough fight for Alves. And that's why you're seeing competitive line here as well. I think a lot of respect was gained back from Alves in his last fight, which was good to see, because I'll tell you what, Alves at one point, man, I mean, he was definitely one of the best welterweights in the world. I mean, he just couldn't get beyond that George St. Hump or John Fitch basically at that time but he was right there with him. I mean, he was the top of the food chain type of welterweight. Just, I mean, explosive striking, great takedown defense. I mean, like I said, everything about him, he was just a fun fighter to watch. And he still is performing at a high level. And again, in his last fight against Max Griffin, it was a very competitive fight, but he did get the nod. And you know what? I was happy for him, because he's proven he could still hang in there and he belongs amongst, some of the younger welterweights that are coming up, or some of the guys that are getting some hype, and kind of, the UFC's using, again, some of these guys, some of these aging vets as a stepping stone in a lot of ways. I mean, whether you like to hear that or not, it's true. And he's been kind of fighting that off a little bit and getting some upsets here and there, which is, again, good to see. So Alves is going to be game here, and this is going to be another close fight. I mean, you cannot count Alves out. I just think the pressure overall and the ability of Starpoli, I think he's a little bit, obviously he's younger, he's 26 years old. I think he's going to be a little bit more durable. That's the thing with Alves. As the fight progresses, he does take a beating. He does take some damage along the way. He's going to get marked up in this fight. I think Starpoli's aggression, again, and his power combined with, a little bit of an unorthodox striking game is going to be effective enough that Alves is going to have his moments, and Starpoli has to be cautious here. But I still think that Starpoli gets it done here. And again, it's probably going to hit the scorecards with a competitive type of decision, but I think Starpoli's pressure, his aggression, and his damage is going to be enough to probably get him the win. Or we could possibly see a late stoppage as it goes as well. I mean, Alves, typically speaking, doesn't have bad cardio, but again, if he accumulates a lot of punishment along the way, age 35, all the wars he's been into, I could see Starpoli maybe finishing it as well. So the pick for me is Starpoli. Like I said, I've been impressed. And if he gets a win over Alves, man, that's back-to-back solid wins. And the UFC, they keep matching him right, we'll see how far this guy goes at welterweight. But interesting prospect, age 26 to watch. So keep an eye on Starpoli.
Yeah, there's still a lot of question marks about Starpoli, but he definitely answered some questions in that UFC debut. Now, granted, he wasn't facing a world beater in Hector Aldana, but Starpoli was throwing heat. He mixed it up great in that fight. I mean, he was throwing spinning attacks. He was jumping knees, lunging knees, heavy kicks, and then some switch kicks even. And then he was doing it for 3 straight rounds. He pushed the high tempo the whole way, and that is what helped him win, because Starpoli, even though he has a bit of a Muay Thai background, he's not the most technical puncher. And that's definitely something that Thiago Alves can take advantage of if Starpoli's a little over aggressive. And, but Starpoli can go. And that really did impress me. I mean, he had the hometown fans really going crazy for him. And, they're giving him a huge step up in competition for this fight. And, it's not going to be easy. I mean, yeah, Thiago Alves is not even close to what he used to be, but he's still capable of winning, tough fights. And, you saw that in that last bout against Max Griffin. So, it's definitely possible that, Starpoli gets steamrolled here. I wouldn't be shocked, but I just really like the pace that Starpoli can put. And, this is a younger fighter with, less mileage and somebody that, has a lot of confidence in himself, because, I mean, Starpoli is willing to get into the pocket and just throw down. And Thiago Alves is a lot more cautious and measured at this point in his career. Alves in his prime had some of the best leg kicks in MMA. And he definitely can still connect with those. So Starpoli can't just, ignore them. And, Alves, even though he doesn't use it often, I think he does have a decent ground game. So if he wants to take this fight to the floor, it would not be the worst idea, because as far as I've seen, Starpoli's pretty untested on the canvas. And that could be a potential huge weakness that Alves could take advantage of. But, Curtis Millender had a huge weakness on the canvas, and Alves just stood with him the whole time until he got finished. So I don't have a ton of confidence in Alves utilizing a great game plan. I think the last time I ever saw Alves really shoot in for a takedown, he immediately got choked out by Martin Kampmann, from it. So, I don't have the most confidence in Alves at this point. He doesn't seem like the same fighter he used to be, and he still has lost 4 of his last 6 fights. Granted, he has faced pretty good competition, but this could be an opportunity for Starpoli to kind of get a little bit of a rub against a solid veteran. So, even though I'm not crazy confident about it, I do think that the pace Starpoli pushes might be enough, and perhaps Alves doesn't have that same zip that he can punish Starpoli for leaving openings and being a little reckless. So I'm going to side with Starpoli. I think that he can win a decision here. Now moving down to the featherweight division, we have former champion Jose Aldo, who is 28-4, taking on Alexander Volkanovski, who is 19-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Aldo minus 185, Volkanovski plus 145. And right now, what you're seeing over at BetDSI, this has been interesting because there's definitely been some action coming back and forth. Right now, we're seeing is Jose Aldo's minus 140. The comeback on Volkanovski is at plus 110 right now. And the line's been bouncing back and forth between 125, 135, 140. Sharp action coming in both ways on this fight as well. So we're getting sharp action on the dog Volkanovski. We're getting some sharp action on Aldo as well. So this is definitely a really tricky fight at this point. I mean, again, in his prime, Jose Aldo is not going to be – the line won't be even this competitive. I know Volkanovski has been amazing so far in the UFC. His win over Mendes showed us a lot as well. And even before that, I mean, he's been nothing but impressive. So Volkanovski deserves to be in this spot, and this is a great time to be fighting Jose Aldo, I think, as well, because Aldo obviously coming off of, that knee concern, I guess you could say, where, we weren't even sure if he was going to take this fight. So in that aspect of things, as far as health-wise goes, Aldo is definitely not going to be 100% taking this fight, but confidence-wise, though, man, I'll tell you what, Aldo is coming off of some impressive victories. I mean, you cannot overlook the fact that beating a guy like Moicano, I mean, and the way he went about doing that, I mean, Moicano's legit. That was not a fluke win. I mean, that was impressive from Jose Aldo. Surprised me. I actually picked Moicano, obviously, in that spot, and I thought he was going to get it done. But it's the confidence kind of came from the fight before that with Jeremy Stevens. I mean, those liver shots these days that Aldo's going to, and he's just drilling to the body. He's just nasty. I mean, people are not obviously able to take the punishment that he's dishing out at times. And then once he has you hurt, that killer instinct's coming back, and he's just putting it on people. So Aldo right now is a very dangerous man. He's found something that works for him, and he's sticking to it. So I think round one for Volkanovski is going to be extremely difficult because Aldo's going to have that confidence. He's going to, and for the first time in a while, I think he actually has that legit confidence that he can go out there and beat anybody. I know, losing to Holloway a couple times after the Conor McGregor situation, all that stuff mentally has had him everywhere. I think it wasn't the best Aldo we've seen, but now getting back on track, I think that's why you can make a case for Jose Aldo. I mean, here against Volkanovski is obviously very hittable, and Aldo with that power he has, man, he could definitely put him out. But on the other side of it, Volkanovski, I think, is going to be the one that's going to be fresher along the way. I mean, if this thing goes 3 rounds, Volkanovski is going to be the stronger fighter, I think, in round 2 and round 3. He's proved again that he could, even though he gets clipped, he could definitely take it. And then he can come back from adversity and obviously perform very well. So he's got knockout power. He's got that relentless pace. If Jose Aldo starts slowing down as this fight progresses, Volkanovski is not going to let up, and he's going to probably finish him. So that's why this fight, again, is intriguing. I could realistically see it going either way. I'm going to go with Volkanovski, I think, in this spot. Again, I do think that Jose Aldo can win this fight, and it's not maybe the best time to bet against the guy. I mean, because like I said, confident Jose Aldo is a scary thing in my opinion, but I still like what I've seen from Volkanovski as a whole. I think, again, if this fight does progress, the longer it goes, I think the tides will turn. Even if Volkanovski's not doing as great early on, I think he will start taking over this fight. So I'm going to side with him and think that he probably gets it done. And as far as a betting perspective, again, I mean, obviously it's one spot here that it's a dog or pass situation in my opinion. Even though there's sharp action coming in on both sides of this fight, for me personally, I don't want to lay chalk on something I think is a coin flip type of fight that could definitely go either way, and both these guys have paths to victory. So outstanding fight. This is probably the fight that I'm looking forward to the most from this whole card, and I'm sure most of you guys are out there as well. So hopefully it lives up to the hype, but my slight lean is towards Volkanovski in this spot.
Yeah, Jose Aldo has definitely tapped into that fountain of youth with those recent performances against Moicano and Stevens. I mean, just ferocious finishes, putting both guys away. But one thing that does concern me is we're hearing multiple reports about a leg issue, not being able to train for this fight. So I'm definitely concerned because, if Aldo was 100% and I was hearing that he was training fine, then I'd probably be picking him here. But with Volkanovski being so tough and durable and a guy that can push a tempo on the feet and shoot in for takedowns and do a lot of damage on the canvas, I'm a little more concerned. So I still think this fight's going to be competitive, and Jose Aldo could win. I mean, they could be playing possum and feeding stuff to the media. I mean, that would not surprise me in the least. But if everything I'm hearing is true, then you have to favor Volkanovski. I mean, this guy has been unstoppable so far in the UFC. He really hasn't even been threatened that much. Chad Mendes got off to a decent start, and then Volkanovski just outlasted him, and then it did a lot of damage, ends up putting him away. And, Jose Aldo has been very aggressive in his last two fights, but he also has been a fighter that tends to fade. And if Volkanovski can push a high tempo, I can see Jose Aldo fading down the stretch. I could see, even though Aldo has historically incredible takedown defense, I can see Volkanovski getting takedowns and potentially keeping Aldo down, especially if he does have a leg issue. I can see Volkanovski getting right in Aldo's face and just trading shots and not being really concerned about eating shots, and because he does have such good durability that he can just go toe-to-toe with Aldo. Now, obviously, Aldo is the better striker. He's better use of distance. He's more athletic in terms of the dynamic strikes that he can throw. But if Volkanovski can just put that pressure on Aldo and force him to fight off his back foot, that could nullify some of Aldo's biggest strengths. So obviously, Jose Aldo is the superior technical striker and the more explosive striker, the more dynamic striker. But if Volkanovski puts a ton of pressure on him, and if Aldo is coming up a little bit lame, then I have to side with Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, he's done nothing so far to convince me that this guy can't potentially be champion material in the UFC. So Volkanovski is going to be my pick. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the middleweight division, we have Jared Cannonier, who is 11-4, taking on Anderson Silva, who is 34-9 with one no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Cannonier opened minus 150, the comeback on Silva plus 110, and right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is Cannonier minus 135, the comeback plus 105 on Silva. So line margins have tightened up again a little bit. And, again, two action coming to this fight, and there will be sharp action coming in this fight both ways as well. Another intriguing fight because you have a guy that they're pushing in Cannonier. I mean, him even getting this Silva fight tells you a lot. I mean, obviously, this is huge for Cannonier. I mean, a win over one of the all-time greats would be just, put him in line immediately in the title realm. I mean, at 185 pounds after only a couple fights. So he looked really good dropping down and destroying Branch like he did. That was impressive. I mean, physically, he looks great at 185 pounds. I mean, he looks like a specimen and he's performing like it again, but it's not a lot of, time in this division yet. And he's fighting a very game Silva still at this age. I mean, he's 44 years old, I believe. And, that fight with Adesanya was pretty impressive. I mean, he lost it, but he was competitive. So he's still competing even despite his, not so great resume as of late as far as win-loss goes for him. I mean, he's been losing a lot of fights. Obviously, Anderson Silva has. He's only won, I believe, one fight and that was against Brunson in the last, I don't know how many, but several. But he's been close in most of those losses is what I'm trying to say. So even against the likes of Daniel Cormier, I was impressed. He definitely lost that fight, but he did even perform better than I thought against Cormier. So Silva's not out of it completely yet. I mean, there's still a lot left in the tank. It looks like he's about to sign a new UFC deal as well. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, he's hungry to fight. And I think part of that, again, is mental for him. When he had the strap, when he was on top of the mountain, there's so much pressure that comes with that once you just start dominating and just never losing that you don't want to lose. I mean, all that pressure eventually gets to you. And I think, honestly, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, he dominated for so long after he lost the belt and just accepted the fact that he might not get that chance again or whatever. I think he just kind of settled in and got comfortable with the fact that he didn't have all that pressure on him. So right now he can go out there and just enjoy the sport again, go fight with, not having that invincibility about him that everybody thinks he can't lose or whatnot. And I think that's why he's been performing a little bit more confident. That's why he has that love again for the sport that you could really tell. So in my opinion, he's still game and he's still dangerous, but he does have a chin that's a 44-year-old chin, and he's been through a lot in his career. So even though it's been holding up recently, I still think Cannonier is the type of explosive fighter, and he's got that knockout power that he could definitely test that 44-year-old chin and put him out. So I think it's going to be a dangerous fight for both men. I think obviously both these guys like to stand and bang. In fact, if it goes to the floor, it's going to be interesting because I think that both of these guys can have their moments possibly on top. And Silva's wrestling has improved to the point where it's hard to take him down. And then obviously his offensive wrestling, he doesn't use it all that much, but it's there. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if he just kind of mixes things up a little bit and just throws, a curveball out here. But should be another great fight. I'm going to lean, I don't want to say the youth because Cannonier is 35 years old, but I'm still going to lean a little bit more towards the new blood. I think he's going to be a little bit more dangerous in this spot. And if he lets those hands go and he can be aggressive, he could probably knock Silva out. So in my opinion, that's probably the way he wins. If he hits the scorecards, it'll be close. But I think Silva with the hometown crowd there, he might edge it out. So if you guys are looking to bet this fight, I would bet if Cannonier probably wins it, he wins it by knockout. I think if it goes to scorecards, you can probably see Silva getting the nod here. So it's one of those type of fights. So I'm going to pick Cannonier though, because again, a great spot for him to come in here and just pick off one of the all-time greats here. And I think at 185 pounds, I'm a believer right now. So let's see what he does here against one of the all-time greats and to see if I'm right or not. But I think Cannonier can deliver in this spot. So I'm going to pick him to win.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see so many old school UFC veterans getting opportunities here against younger guns. We've seen it with Staropoli against Alves, with Span against Nogueira, and now we're seeing it with Cannonier against Silva. Cannonier, this is just his second fight at 185 pounds, but that first fight was incredible. I mean, he went in there against Dave Branch, a guy that's a savvy vet who had gone on a crazy unbeaten streak to become a champion at 205 pounds and 185 pounds in World Series of Fighting. And, Cannonier just starched him. So, if he connects solidly with Silva, he absolutely can knock him out. But that being said, Cannonier is clearly not invincible. He was, knocked out in the heavyweight division. He was convincingly defeated, in the light heavyweight division. And again, now he's dropping down to 185, and he had success in that first fight, but he's still a very beatable opponent. Cannonier is a little bit more about speed and power, and it's not nearly as much about technique like Anderson Silva, who can throw crazy feints. And once Silva kind of figures out his opponent, he becomes so much more dangerous because he feels he can take more risks, that he'll be able to avoid what his opponents throw because he can see it coming. Now, clearly, Anderson Silva's not as fast as he used to be. He's not as powerful as he used to be. He doesn't have the reflexes that he used to have. But that being said, he's still a dangerous fighter. I mean, he went 5 rounds with Israel Adesanya, and he got touched up over the course of that, but Adesanya at this point is one of the best 185 pounders in the world. And, so this is a step down for, Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva is a tremendous striker. And while Cannonier does have that explosive power, if Anderson Silva can, dodge an explosive power shot and then counter effectively in this fight, then he's going to do some serious damage. Cannonier can definitely be knocked out. I mean, he got knocked out at heavyweight. I definitely expect that he can be knocked out when he's cutting even more and more and more weight. He just hasn't faced somebody that was able to connect solidly against him so far. But Anderson Silva definitely is capable of doing that. So I think the old dog still is capable of pulling off some new tricks. And I know that people are not believing in Anderson Silva at this point, but I thought that he held his own against Adesanya. That was not a blowout loss against one of the best fighters on the planet, and Cannonier is not even close to that same level of striker that Adesanya is. So, I mean, as long as Anderson Silva can avoid getting his clock cleaned with a big power shot, I think Anderson Silva can land effective strikes against Cannonier, and I think Anderson Silva can potentially knock Cannonier out if he lands that right strike that Cannonier doesn't see coming. So I'm going to side with Anderson Silva here. I'm going to pick the Spider to get another win in the octagon. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening in the women's strawweight division, we have champion Rose Namajunas, who is 9-3, taking on Jessica Andrade, who is 19-6. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Rose Namajunas opened -140. The comeback on Jessica Andrade, even money. And what you're seeing right now over at BetDSI is minus 130 Andrade, even money the other way for Namajunas. So this is definitely a good fight. It's an awesome fight. I mean, we haven't seen Rose for a while. She's been out over a year. She had neck surgery, I believe, as well. So she's had some time on the shelf, and, you know, obviously, some mental stuff she went through as well. I mean, it's a shame that she's been on the shelf this long. We want to see her perform. I mean, the class battles instantly that she had with Jędrzejczyk were just amazing, and it showed really what kind of fighter I think Namajunas is. I mean, she's definitely a talented fighter in all aspects of the game, and she deserves to wear that strap. So with the skill she has, she's a great striker on the feet. She has a really good submission game as well. She needs to continue to work on that wrestling a little bit more. I think that's still one of her, you know, biggest weaknesses, is she can get put on her back. And if you can't, obviously, if you can survive her, submission attempts, then you can have some success, as Esparza did, you know, fairly. It's been a couple years now, of course, since that fight, but I mean, that's a path to victory if you're going to beat, I think, somebody like Rose at times, if you can avoid those submissions. But that's the thing here. I mean, she's tricky everywhere the fight goes. She's impressive. So I think this is going to be an interesting fight, because Andrade has just looked like, I mean, honestly, she's looked like the champion. She's competed out there like the champion. She's been going out and just destroying competition. I mean, if you look what she did to Kovacevic in her last fight, I mean, wow, it was very impressive. And they've been testing her. I mean, the way she beat Claudia Gadelha was amazing. It was impressive. I mean, she just dominated. So I think Andrade has been coming into her own for a long time. And unfortunately for her, stylistically, the Jędrzejczyk fight was just you know, bad matchup for her, because Joanna was able to use that distance and utilize that space well enough to keep her on the outside and just pick her apart. And Andrade was having, you know, she was frustrated closing that gap and not able to have success. But this is a different fight that she's getting with Namajunas here. And I think even though Rose is an excellent striker in her own right, I mean, she's going to have to follow that blueprint to a T that Jędrzejczyk did to beat Andrade. I think Andrade is capable of closing that gap and landing some hard punches. And of course, she does have that knockout power, especially at 115 pounds. We've seen it. Her cardio and conditioning is outstanding as well, Andrade. So I think she has that advantage. And then as far as the wrestling go, there's no question she has that advantage as well. The only concern in this fight for me with Andrade is, honestly, will she get submitted on the ground? Because she has, you know, some sketchy sub defense at times. She's made mistakes in the past and has got her beat. She seems to have addressed some of those issues. And if she does not get caught by armbar, triangle choke, or anything like that against Rose, I think she's on her way to a victory here and becoming the new champion. So not going to count Rose out exactly, though, because again, on the feet, it's going to be competitive. Rose will have she'll have her moments, and if she can utilize that spacing and try to keep Andrade on the outside again, she can win this fight, or she can win it by submission. But for me, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Andrade in this fight. I just think, I mean, it's her time now, and I think, again, she's been devastating on the feet, devastating on the ground. She's just been a beast in a good way, I guess you could say. And I think Rose is just going to be just a little bit out of her realm, again, with the time off and everything that she's, I think, went through with the time off, and you know, her mental and physical state at this point. I'm sure she's going to come in shape and she's going to be game, but I still think, I don't know. I mean, as far as cage rest goes or time off, Andrade has been fighting a little bit more consistently. She's a little bit more hungry right now. And again, I just don't know where Rose is mentally at this stage either. So I think there's more advantages going into this fight right now for Andrade, and stylistically it should be a little bit of a better fight than it was against Jędrzejczyk as well. So I'm going to go with Andrade in this fight. I'm going to say she gets crowned the new champion, and she has an impressive performance. But I hope it's a great fight, because again, I mean, I can't ever count out Namajunas. She has several paths to victory in this fight, and I'm expecting quite a battle along the way. So looking forward to it, but my pick is Andrade. And again, if this line continues to kind of flip back and forth, or if Andrade becomes an underdog, then I would definitely recommend a bet on her. Even at this price at minus 120, minus 130 out there that, you know, currently at, it's almost worth a slight stab at Andrade as well. So, I am leaning her way. And again, you got to kind of watch the line movement. And if you do see the line drop even further, I would recommend probably placing a bet on Andrade. If not, if the line climbs a little bit, just stay away, or it's a dog or pass situation, one of those situations again. And that's a lot on this card. I mean, we have several spots like that for a reason. This is a well-matched card and some intriguing fights for sure along the way. So be careful betting this card. It should be more fun than there is a tremendous amount of value scattered throughout. So that's just my take on it. I'm picking Andrade to become the new women's strawweight champion.
And I'm right with you, actually. I know Jessica Andrade ran into some trouble the last time she had a title opportunity against Jędrzejczyk, who utilized distance about as perfectly as I've ever seen a fighter utilize it in a major headlining fight. But this is a different fight. Rose Namajunas is a talented striker. She's got pop in her hands. She's quick. She counters effectively, but she's not quite the type that, that historically at least puts a jab right in her opponent's face and then keeps you, moving backwards and landing effective, strikes like that. That hasn't been her style. And Jessica Andrade is just all about pressure. And I think that yes, Namajunas is going to find, openings along the way, and she definitely is going to land. But Jessica Andrade is just forward, heavy strikes in combination, high volume attacks, throwing her opponent around with big explosive takedowns, tossing them around even. She's just so physically strong and active and pushes such a high tempo. I think it's going to be difficult for Rose to keep up. I know that Rose, her conditioning has improved. We've seen some really strong performances from her against, that went deeper into fights, against, Paige Van Zandt, against, Young Jacek most recently. But that being said, we've also seen her fade in fights when the tempo did get pushed, like against, Kowalkiewicz or against, Carlos Esparza. So I think if Andrade puts a high enough pace on this fight, I think it's going to be difficult for Rose to keep up, especially, after she's coming off of some injuries and some surgery. So, Jessica Andrade is just a nasty opponent with some good power, as you saw from, you don't see girls land those type of vicious knockouts, like Andrade did against, Kowalkiewicz. So that's something that, granted, I think Rose has a great chin and she can take, what Andrade is dishing out, but, I think that Rose also could fade, absolutely could fade in this fight. Now, if it goes to the floor, Rose should have an edge in terms of grappling. I mean, she can throw flying arm bars at people. She's got incredible arm bars, chokes. She can definitely finish this fight on the floor, and Andrade has been submitted in the past. But Rose doesn't typically look to take fights to the floor. It's more her ground game historically has been defensively when she gets put on her back, where she's looking for submissions. So, but that being said, Andrade typically does look for takedowns. There definitely could be opportunities for Namajunas to get a submission. And I think Namajunas could land just random shots out of nowhere. I've seen Andrade get hurt a little bit on the feet when she was fighting at 135. Not now, but it definitely can happen. So Rose is extremely talented, but for me, Jessica Andrade is fighting in her home country. She's incredibly motivated. She looks nasty right now. And I think that she has a style that's going to be difficult for Rose to stop. I don't see Rose, just really stopping Andrade in her tracks with jabs over and over again like Young Jacek was able to do. Even though Rose outstruck Young Jacek, like that's still not the style that I think that she can impose in this type of contest. It's more Rose was able to get into the pocket against Young Jacek and then avoid her combinations and then crack back. So against Andrade, I think that's going to be a lot more difficult. So I'm going to side with Jessica Andrade. I think by the end of Saturday night, we're going to have a new UFC women's strawweight champion. So that'll do it for a full event breakdown for UFC 237. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.